Well, we might not be having Mega Man 12 or Mega Man.EXE 9 anytime soon, unless either of those have been announced since I wrote this video. But Capcom seem to be very good at collating old releases and making collections, with the latest of these being the Mega Man Battle Network collection. I'm going to feel sick saying this, but the first Battle Network game is now 22 years old. It's been a while since my last video, so let's dust off our glossary, fire up our old brains, and study some video game animation. The Mega Man Battle Network games, if you didn't know, were tactical role-playing video games for the Gameboy Advance, or most of them were anyway. Hardware limitations of the GBA meant sprites were likely split up and cleverly reordered to save space and memory. I have a very rudimentary understanding of this process, but if you want to know more, here's some really good videos on the topic, links are below in the description. We're going to take a look at some of the animations in Battle Networks 1 to 6, how they worked, and talk a little bit about animation fundamentals and pepper it with other tidbits. The animations we're going to look at will mostly be Mega Man, but we'll also look at bosses and enemies and miscellaneous stuff like effects and NPCs. Because I'm a man of little free time, most of the footage I'm using will be from channels who have already captured this footage, with links of those channels in my description because I simply don't have time to play and record 6 10-hour games. So massive thanks to those channels. Okay, so typically a controllable video game character will be at any one time in one of 3 states. They'll be in a loop, a link, or a linear. Looping animations are things like an idle pose or running animation. A linear animation will play once and end, such as an attack or taking damage. And a transitional animation, or linking animation, are things like turning or connecting two animations, such as the last pose of an attack back into the idle pose. You'll commonly see a link animation play between linears and loops, and you're more likely to see linking animations in games that use character rigs, where you have more control over states of animation. Linking animations aren't as common in frame-by-frame animated games, because it's a bit more work to make them look visually fluid, but they do show up occasionally. Jonathan Cooper, animation director on games like Assassin's Creed, The Last of Us, and Uncharted, wrote a book about video game animation, and in it he posits a new additional set of animation principles he calls the 5 fundamentals of video game animation. Within that, he talks about these types of animations we can find that contribute towards the fluidity of game animation, how smooth it all flows together. This is super common in loads of older games, but the Battle Network games are good at doing a lot with a little. They're good at finding elegant solutions due to the restricted space available, meaning that you're actually not likely to see many linking animations around. The fluidity is compromised for the sake of game feel, which is fine. You do see some, but I'll talk more about those later. Feel is how a game feels to control, like if it's snappy or sluggish or something. Ideally you'll want to minimise any interruptions or delay to player input, but we'll come back to this. Okay, so usually you start each game in the real overworld, controlling Lan, a human boy. Much of a Battle Network game happens on the internet or devices, so there's actually not a lot really going on in the real overworld in terms of animation. Lan can move in 8 directions. He can skate fast and walk slow, with slightly differing animations for both. There's some more twisting in the body while skating, for example. Though only 5 directions will be designed, as 3 of them can be flipped. This obviously means that Lan's design must be symmetrical in this case, so nothing looks weird when switching between left and right. This is different to, say, the Minish Cap, where Link's animations are asymmetrical, but you only ever see him from 4 angles, so there's more space to place unique animations. Also, we see Link from this viewpoint through the whole game. He attacks, navigates, speaks, performs unique actions, all in these 4 angles, so there's more room to be extravagant. There are a number of unique and polished linear animations which are saved for common actions and cutscenes, such as the jacking in animation, which is slightly different in each game, and a handful of other moments for specific scenarios. These are always usually from the front, but might be from other angles. There's no animation for talking to people, as you tend to have separate close-up facial animations when characters talk, which remain pretty much the same regardless of scenario. And there's no animation for interacting with objects, mostly anyway. Other characters you interact with, or are part of the story, will have less movement than Lan, such as only having 4 moving directions, for example, instead of 8. There's some environmental animation here and there, cars moving, flowing water, things to keep it looking lively and functional. Nice and simple. The most comprehensive animation is Lan's movement, which is fine, you'll spend most of your time in the real world doing this. All 6 games essentially use this same movement, aside from 4 to 6, which begin using smaller sprites to save a bit more space on the game cartridge, but the actions are essentially the same. Oh, by the way, I am literally just doing the 6 main games in the Game Boy Advance, so no 4.5, no Battleship Challenge, no Network Transmission, and no Operate Shooting Star. Sorry, I can't be bothered. Whenever you jack in, which is a retro-futuristic way of saying log on, and even that's a bit of a dated phrase in itself, you take control of MegaMan.EXE, your personal computer program with a mind of its own, even though it can't do much unless you tell it to. You teleport in a sort of Tron style, a glow which dissipates after. This digital overworld behaves in the exact same way as the real overworld, so Mega Man can run or walk in 8 directions and has a handful of bespoke actions tailored for certain situations, like taking this battle-ready pose during scenarios, or this fist grab action for picking something up. And as I mentioned previously, the 4th, 5th and 6th games use new, smaller, more stylised sprites to save extra storage space on the game cartridge. So because Pokemon and card collecting games were really popular at the time, the Battle Network games are tactical turn-based card, or chip, collecting action games. This results in you being pulled into a virus battle when running around on the internet and anything else you can jack into. These net battles are where the animation is more detailed and comprehensive, and where the games absolutely shine. Lots to look at here. Mega Man does lots of moving while in battle, but only when attacking. He is otherwise static when standing still, aside from blinking. This is to ensure that whenever you start an attack, it's guaranteed you'll start from the same place each time, as it can become unsightly to jump into the start of an action when you're in a different pose. There's no running around during battle. Instead, when you traverse the battlefield, you have this blurry shimmer effect as you snap from tile to tile. It has this slight stretch aesthetic which gives the move a kind of bouncy appeal. Enemies and bosses also have this, and it's a stylistic way of keeping things from looking flat and dull. When you start a battle or when the round refreshes, you pick battle chips, giving you a number of different attacks. The great thing about this is that one action can cover a range of different attacks just by changing the type of gun Mega Man has on his arm, for example. I touched on this earlier, and this is what is referred to as elegance in game animation. It's how much bang you get for your buck, how much you can do within the limitations you have. Your basic buster shot is just an arm pointing forward from this battle-ready pose, popping back slightly with each bullet, and a nice muzzle flash cast of light. But if you take the buster off and put, say, a fan on the end, then you have a totally different attack, but the same basic action. And it's not an entirely new sprite. The base sprite is likely just the body and the arm, and it's just a matter of swapping different hand sprites on top. The same with a lance or spear attack. It's just the shooting animation, but this time it has a bow on the end, with its own little animation on top of what's already there. Just add variety and texture. This method of one customizable animation for a range of attacks allows for loads of potential with relatively little work. Again, an elegant solution. For instance, this throwing animation is used for loads of attacks because Mega Man can throw a bomb, or an orb that transforms into an object, a wave, or a raton, for example. And the actual animation is just Mega Man with an empty hand, and the object is pasted on top of the animation. I like the slight raise of the foot here at the end, as a good feeling of weight here. Just to add further clarity, throwing a bomb and throwing a raton have slightly different ending frames. The raton throw ends in a slightly lower pose compared to the bomb throw, with the leg kicking up higher and lasting a little bit longer. But the overall motion is generally the same, just a slight clever tweak at the end. The sword animation is cool. It's a generic swipe that covers a range in front, but it's the effect on top of the animation that determines whether it's a wide attack or a long attack or a fire attack or water attack. It's a simple and clever way of giving longevity to a resource. The pickaxe is one of my favourites. It's a risk-reward attack, as the startup is a little slower, but the energy behind this pose and the follow-through is just fab. Just this little extra bit as it goes onto his tippy toes is just adorable. This animation is reused for the hammer and is a little quicker. This slow build-up is called anticipation and is a fundamental of all animation, but in game animation it's more directly linked to feel, which I mentioned earlier. The longer an attack or action takes to happen once you've given the command, the greater the disconnect between the player and the game, especially if it's unintentional. But when put to good use and done right, it gives the player a sense of satisfaction. This sort of forward thrust move is interesting as it covers a range of varied attacks, such as this orb conjuring into an elemental fist attack, a guts punch, and a dash move. Many of these moves finish with this little realignment animation, as though readjusting after the attack, which is a linking animation after all. Resetting the end of the attack animation back to the idle pose. There are also a lot of attacks that simply dim the screen and the attack itself just plays without any movement from Mega Man. Some might have a shake or something, like folder back. Also, some chips will take effect immediately, again with no animation from Mega Man, such as Invis or Health Up or something. Some games have chips like Invis be immediate, and some have them as screen dims. Debates on which is better or more effective, I'll leave that to you. The Heavy Stamp Program Advance from Battle Network 1 is interesting. It uses one frame from the throwing animation to form this attack that Mega Man does to the other side of the battlefield, with another element on top to give this unique looking animation. Really cool. Guts Shoot is another interesting one. It has Gutsman pick Mega Man up and throw him, but the first couple of frames actually use his hurt animation, and then uses the final frame of his punch animation. Just loads of ingenuity to reuse assets effectively. This is mostly how it goes throughout all 6 games. Battle Network 6 has Mega Man in slightly more dynamic poses for certain animations, with better lines of action, but the same elegant tricks are in place to make things look awesome. Actually, let's just quickly chat about that pose. It's quite good in that you can initiate a lot of attacks from this pose without it feeling awkward that he has to twist or move to get into those starting points. It's kind of like this point in my classic Mega Man animation video in Mega Man 7, where if you shoot when you have the shield, you shoot the closest arm to the viewer, meaning you get this awkward snapping that's not very appealing. It works here, however. All the attacks feel tight and smooth, as they all start from this dynamic starting point. Even when you have a different form, which brings me on to my next point, style changes. These start in Battle Network 2 and evolve into Soul Unisons and Beast Crosses as the games go on. They start as simple static poses with added armor segments, and when Mega Man performs any other action, it briefly switches to the original animations just recolored. You can even see it when jumping around the battlefield. That slight shimmer effect when you move doesn't disguise your original appearance. However, once we start getting more complicated changes, like Soul Unisons, we start seeing shimmer animation of those as well. It wouldn't notice too much if you switched from Metal Mega Man back to Basic Mega Man and back again. Even if this is still just pasting additional elements on top of a base Mega Man, which I suspect it isn't, it's still massively comprehensive. There's lots of additions which essentially make this feel like an entirely fresh animation construction. This may be one reason why the overworld sprites were changed in these later games, to accommodate more space for more frames. That's a theory anyway. Speaking of more space for frames, in Battle Network 6, as well as the cross system, using powers and appearances from other characters, you can also beast out, turning an already altered Mega Man into a further altered one. So you have a new base set of animations, and then if you're already crossed, additions are made on top of your beast out, like flames or horns or something. Hefty stuff. Also, the beast out animation is hella cool, shaking the camera like crazy and giving off this really over-the-top purple fire with Mega Man silhouetted within. Great stuff. You still have that snappy responsiveness for those moves that need it, and it doesn't feel unsightly to look at. Those poses have been made just so. The limitations have created this tight visual language which prioritises the feel of the game. It's just a wonderful display of clever programming, if anything. I think it's safe to say that Mega Man looks and feels great in these games, thanks to the combination of great posing, great and varied timing, and use of effects on top to alter an animation. Also, I just love Gyro Cross's style and animations. Ugh, I just love it. I think we should have a quick talk about bosses, because there's lots of them. There's like at least 14 bosses in each game, with the most being 24 or something. The game's battles are exciting and tense. You're going to want some cool looking characters, poses and animation to reflect this. Because there are so many characters to animate, some bosses have fewer frames than others, but the way in which they're used makes up for that. Let's compare a couple of bosses from the first game. Let's do Fireman.EXE and SharkMan.EXE. Fireman is the first boss and part of the game's first chapter. When he jumps around the field, he has these frames which build into and out of the shimmer effect, almost as if he is literally jumping around the field. His standing sprite is static, but he has this confident straight back, with a fire on top of his head looping over, and loops over in other actions as well. It's probably a separate asset. He has some cute smear frames on these quick actions, as he builds up two types of flamethrower moves. These two moves aren't even the same frames, by the way, they're slightly different. I thought it might be a cleverly split up and reordered frame, but no, they're entirely different poses. This move he does here could have easily been reused as his damage recoil animation, but that's got unique frames too. Fireman has got so much going on. He's easily one of the more detailed bosses in the game, second only to perhaps Gutsman. There are a few others who have some jumping looking frames with their shimmer animation, and some others have recoil animations, but Fireman might be the one with the most unique frames. He even has this glow from his fire attack, it's awesome. I guess it kind of makes sense. He's the first boss and therefore needs to be on the easier side. He's glamorous and easy to read, showing us when he's about to move, and when he's about to build up and unleash an attack, which is called telegraphing by the way. He's a gorgeously animated first boss. At the other end of the spectrum, we have SharkMan. SharkMan has 3 frames of animation. Well, when he's above water, he has 1 static frame and 2 teeny tiny blink and you'll miss them frames of him emerging from and submerging back into the water. However, when he's underwater, he has 2 additional decoys to hide with, resulting in 3 distinct shark fins that glide up and down and attack when they come in line with MegaMan. The fins themselves have 3 or 4 frames of this tiny wiggle. Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they're static, which I don't understand. But when they attack, there'll be this cool looking splash animation on top, which gives it a much more exciting feel than just the fins on their own. Generally, the effects in this fight are what elevate it from feeling a bit too static and dull. In fact, the splashes themselves practically hide those 2 tiny frames he has when moving in and out of the water. Makes me wonder why they didn't just hide them altogether. But you fight him a little later and he's meant to be a little tougher. Notice that the reduced frame count feeds nicely into the nearly absent telegraphing of his attacks. There's near to no anticipation at all, which makes this an intentionally tough battle. Stoneman and Colorman are 2 other bosses who have minimal frames, but are still given some form of life with clever use of movement. Colorman, for example, has a tiny bob as he glides up and down his lane, and Stoneman's arms are detached from his body and can slam down independently. If this is clever reordering of sprite parts, then you could maybe say Stoneman doesn't have any unique animation at all, and is all just assets being mathematically moved around. Desert Man doesn't move at all, though his hands glide up and down. Both the hands and his face have this flowing sand animation, with peppered bits of animation for damage and turning into walls. Pharaoh Man has literally 1 unique frame and hovers up and down his row with no animation. Everything visual is left up to his coffins that release traps and attacks. I quite like Dive Man. He's like a slightly more advanced Shark Man, hiding underwater and only coming up to attack, but he's got some nice strong poses with limited animation to get those attacks going, such as this big wave attack. Really pushed poses, love it. That's another thing about all the bosses, they all have distinct personalities and traits. Some stand with straight confident backs, some have a kind of hunched creepy look, some have a similar battle ready pose to MegaMan. There's usually some evidence of personality within their idle animations. This is generally the case across all 6 games, with some bosses having more unique and glamorous frames of animation than others, with less extravagant bosses being decorated with effects. Which brings me on to my next point, enemies and effects. There's lots of bosses, but there's an absolute poo load of enemies, and you can't animate them all with lots of smooth, uniquely crafted frames. But what you can do is texture and pattern these frames with other types of animation. A Meteor is mostly still until it attacks, sending a wave across the screen. Stronger ones hide in their helmet, but still static until then. If you've got 3 Mets, that's a pretty uninteresting battlefield. This bird enemy, I don't know enemy names, I refuse to learn, glides up and down different lanes, tilting as it does so, and then locking on and powering up its rocket when it's aligned with MegaMan. This burner enemy has a looping animation of fire underneath, and opens its mouth to fire off an attack. All these enemies have varying amounts of animation, but they're all slightly different, and when you have all these different enemies on a battlefield together, combined with the often mesmerising background, then you get this really nice textured, varied appeal across the board, layering up different levels of animation until you get them all at once doing different things, and it feels alive. Add this into an interesting battlefield, like in Battle Network 2, and you get something really interesting at relatively little cost. It also helps that enemies all look really different too. You can get a nice array of different silhouettes on the field, and this makes it easy to recognise what sort of attacks and difficulties you'll face. The effects do a lot of work in the Battle Network games for sure. Explosions and splashes and flames and electricity, it's all really well thought out and efficient. Combining less extravagant characters with effects on top helps to keep things looking interesting and alive. In fact, I'd say the final boss of each game make the most of this. The life virus is mostly static, just the occasional limb motion and the legs are redrawn, but it's mostly shields and effects. When I say limb motion, I mean even though this is moving, it hasn't necessarily been redrawn into a different frame, it's just the same frame, just moved into a different position. This is a quick and easy way to get across movement without redrawing the asset. Treble is mostly just the various parts moving, the only animated bit is in the mouth. But most of the additional movement comes from it simulating other Navis throughout the game, which is clever, I'd say. Alright, I know its name's not Treble, it's Gospel. Like I said, I don't do names, alright? Alpha is, again, similar in that it's mostly split up into various parts which float and move independently, with the shoulders having the most unique animation going on, really. Duo, the same, mostly static with some floating assets that flip into another image if needed, mostly effects. Nebula Grey actually has a bit going on, there's actual redrawn frames of animation going on, as well as general floaty limb movement, and lots of cool effects as well. Gregor is the same as Gospel pretty much, but Falzar actually has a good few unique frames of animation with the wings and such here. Okay, I'm nearly done talking, but there's one important thing I want to bring up before moving on to stray thoughts. Everything in this game has a shadow. This is important because it helps ground our characters into the environment, with just that little bit of extra believability that they exist in their world. Other games have shadows on their characters, like A Link to the Past or Secret of Mana, but for comparison, some don't, like Pokemon Leaf Green or Final Fantasy III. Does that matter? I don't know. But I like it. I like that it's a consideration to help characters feel real and grounded and that they exist. Alright, that's mostly me done. I've used up all available spare time to research, write, record, edit, animate and produce this video. I'm done. Oh, I completely forgot you can actually take control of Navis in the later games. Ugh, they all look really fab and awesome, and I really want to talk about how different they look and feel because they all need a quick buster attack which needs to read well and be responsive without looking disgusting, and how they all have a different looking buster attack. Oh man, that'll just have to be another video or a YouTube short or something. Ugh, okay, some stray thoughts. Battle Network 5 originally had a turning animation, according to the Japanese trailer, but this was ultimately removed. I like Protoman's sword swipe in particular, nice and stylish and snappy. I like how Roll's animation changes over the games, gaining more frames of movement. Personally, I think Battle Network 2 has the most personality, with her raising her arms before leaving, nice and expressive. I like the flames in Fireman's area in the first game. I like how Flashman has a unique variant on moving across his side of the battlefield, kind of flipping in sideways. I like Search Cross in the later games. Mega Man looks cool with it on. Also, I like this little bit of unique animation where Land throws his PET at this guy, just... such great humour in these games. Let's see what you all had to say on my community post. Nice. Interesting. Aha, yes, nice one. Very good. Excellent responses. These games are huge, so I can't cover everything. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you enjoy that I didn't get to cover, or what your favourite animation is. Okay, I'm done. My brain battery is like nearly at 10%, which is basically nothing. Thanks for watching. Thanks to my Patreon supporters for funding the episode. Thanks to other channels for having that footage I used. Thanks to my postman for delivering Battle Network Legacy Collection on time. Thanks to my girls for making me laugh and smile every day. Thanks to my mum for everything, I suppose. Thanks to Ben for Netflix. Don't forget to drink water. Be kind. Remember to get fresh air once in a while. Oh, I need to remember to fill in that form and return those shoes. They're a bit tight. Need to get the car in for its MOT. I'm hungry. Oh, love you, bye.